Thank you, Paul. Thank you, and hello, everyone. Uh, can I just say before I begin, if you hear snoring in the background, if you listen, yeah, that's my very old dog. It's not my wife. My wife never snores, or so she tells me. Okay, how about going away somewhere? Just you and me. Peter, my 17-year-old son, looked up from his Game Boy machine. A boys' weekend, I went on. His face lit up. Wow, that sounds cool. You mean go on a plane, stay in a hotel and things like that? He replied, shaking his hands. Well, yes, I replied, just a little hesitantly, not wanting to break the bank, but go somewhere to do something or see something new. Oh, that sounds great, Daddy. When do we go? So began our first annual boys' weekend. In our family, Peter and I are the oppressed male minority. My wife and three daughters, the oppressive majority. In February 2006, I decided, with Peter now approaching adulthood, the two of us needed a little more man time together, away from all these women. Rather disturbingly, the ladies reacted with joyful celebration at the prospect of us going away. I think they called it respite. We spent a few days in research, finally deciding that we should fly to London and go for a day's racing at Lingfield Racecourse. I called the ticket office to find out about prices. When I explained we were flying from Belfast and that Peter had multiple disabilities, the receptionist was very nice and said they would make extra special arrangements for us. We got a table in the dining club overlooking the finishing line of the racecourse where we could eat, drink, view the races in luxury, and access to all facilities, all for £50 each. I booked it. After a Saturday morning flight a few weeks later and a short taxi ride from London Airport, we arrived at the course just in time for the day's racing. We were met by Maureen, the hospitality hostess, who placed our luggage in reception and escorted us to our dining club table, providing us with race programs and special badges that allowed us to visit all the different bars, stables, paddocks, and betting arenas. We were treated like lords. We were even taken briefly to the director's box as VIP guests for pre-race cocktails. Peter never stopped smiling. I never stopped drinking. Our lunch was sumptuous. I drank lots of wine while Peter guzzled his favourite Diet Coke. And before the race, we visited the bookies and each chose a horse to bet on. With limited experience betting on horses, I tried to guide my son with a fatherly wisdom and advice. I think the term is patronizing. He spurned it all, selecting instead his horse using a very clear strategy. Its name began with the letter P. I limited our spending to £2 each way bets, a total for each race of £8. But of course, for Peter, the numbers were irrelevant. He couldn't count. It was just money to him. We returned to our table in the dining club with its fantastic view of the beautiful course, the horses, and the jockeys. It was packed with several hundred people, cheering on their horses from their drink laden tables. Peter revelled in the electric atmosphere. My horse came sixth and his second. He was devastated that he had not won. But when I explained that his each way bet meant that he had actually won £5, his eyes lit up like beacons and he threw his hands in the air, screaming like a banshee. To Peter, a fiver was the most valuable thing in the world, and the folks around us smiled at his celebration. He couldn't wait for the next race. This time, we stayed at our table while a lovely lady came to take bets using a handheld computer. This meant I could drink even more wine. Happy days. Peter laid his second bet, employing a new strategy, choosing a horse whose jockey wore his favourite colour, red, for Man United. I lost again, but this time Peter won. His shrieks of joy resonated around the room and were applauded by our newfound racing friends. The third race, Peter won again. And the same in the fourth race. By now, the whole dining club was getting more and more excited by his newcomer's winning streak. Of the first 7 races, he won 4 and was placed in 3. When it came to the last race, it seemed like everybody in the room was yelling, "Which horse is the young lad betting on? What's Peter backing?" Peter loudly declared like a town crier, "I'm backing number 8 because it's the 8th race." Several punters shook their heads and groaned. This was an old nag, not worth backing. But most people stuck with Peter's beginner's luck. The big race was why the big difference was that while Peter and I placed our final £2 each way bets, others around us were betting hundreds of pounds and much more in some cases on number 8. And they were off. Everyone jumped to their feet. The horses were thundering down the wide bend, now approaching the straight. The finishing line was coming up. "Come on, number 8, please win," cried Peter. The crowd around shouted, "Come on, minstrel girl, come on, minstrel girl." The filly was number 8. At the finishing line below us, we held our breath in the final seconds. Peter was jumping up and down, willing minstrel girl to cross the line first. "Please win, number 8, please win," he cried. And she did. And he bloody won. The roof nearly came off the building. The cheering, crying, yelling filled the room like a typhoon. Peter was clapping his hands, tears running down his cheeks. Others had won hundreds of thousands of pounds, but his tiny winnings were countless in terms of personal achievement. Suddenly a bottle of champagne appeared, courtesy of another table, who had had a very big win, attributed to Peter, their adopted lucky mascot. We left Lingfield that day with Peter being the celebrity that everyone wanted to congratulate. Indeed, often the question was, when does he come back? By now, I had drunk 2 bottles of wine and a bottle of champagne and was looking forward to bed. We took the train into London, checked into our hotel, and after a light supper, collapsed into our beds, very happy. Peter richer by over £100 and me truly pickled. I woke with a start in the morning. Peter was shaking me. "Daddy, Daddy, it's time to get up. It's Sunday. We have to go to Mass." I groaned and held my very sore head with both hands. "Peter," I croaked, "when fellows go away on a boys' weekend, the church says they don't have to go to Mass, son, okay?" Peter would have none of it. A young man wedded to routine was not about to change now, so reluctantly, I dragged myself out of bed. We had breakfast, checked out, and boarded a tube train. Cunningly, I had calculated that at 11:30, it was now probably too late to catch Mass anywhere. But to be sure, I suggested that we head for Westminster Cathedral, no less, near Victoria, knowing it would take a good hour to get there. I judged we would find all the ceremonies ended by the time we reached it. Standing before the magnificent building in the middle of the empty square, I commiserated with my poor son. "Oh dear Peter, it looks like Mass is over." "Oh well, we tried our best. That's what counts, son. Especially when you're far away from home. You tried your best to make it to Mass." But Peter was not happy. He folded his arm in disgust and grumbled, "I don't think that's right, Daddy." Suddenly a door opened, and out came a young priest. He clapped his hands and ran towards us. "Hi, guys." He was an effusive American. "Worst luck. You're just in time for today's special High Mass. Come on, I'll get you a seat." I started to apologize and mumble some lame excuse, but Peter was already running after the priest. I trotted forlornly behind. It was a High Mass to end all High Masses. There were at least 10 priests. There were 2 choirs. There was a bloody orchestra, for God's sake. There were 2 long sermons. Peter was in heaven. I was in purgatory. My head throbbed for the whole 2 hours. Yes, 2 hours. Was this God's punishment for me taking my son gambling? Or was it God's twisted sense of humor for me conspiring to miss Mass? Whatever, we grabbed a quick lunch nearby and then off to the airport for our flight home. That evening, Peter chattered incessantly about flying in the big jet, the racehorses, his winnings, Daddy's drinking, and the big Mass in London. It was the first of 14 boys' weekends so far. The magic is always that look of joy on Peter's face, achieving something new, and the precious time together, us two on our boys' weekend.